Coming up on Currently, Beth Milligan and Craig Manning are here with Craig taking us to Leelanau County, offering updates on the Youth for Christ permit in Leland, the future of Nittolo's in Lake Leelanau, and Beth giving us the latest on a proposed car wash on Front Street and the Carnegie building. That's up next on Currently. Welcome to Currently, where we discuss some of the top local stories directly from the journalists who are covering them. I'm your host, Crystal Frost, and this podcast was recorded on Thursday, April 23rd. The Tigers are 13-12, second in the American League Central. Support for Currently comes from West Shore Bank. When you choose West Shore Bank, you're not just choosing a bank, you are choosing a partner committed to the well-being of our community. And you can visit them today on 8th Street in Traverse City or at westshorebank.com. Support also comes from the Fresh Coast Film Festival, Traverse City. Check out the full lineup and get the tickets now at tc.freshcoastfilm.com. And support comes from Old Town Playhouse, where community comes together in downtown Traverse City. Friends, we are back. Craig, I haven't seen you since last year.
I know.
You were like our
Happy New Year.
our last show of 2025. We were doing like a best.
Right. We did like the top stories of the year.
We
It
did.
was an extra long episode.
It
And
was-
we talked about our favorite albums and stuff.
Our favorite albums. It was so good.
We went long on that one.
We did. And you talked, though, about doing some marathons this year.
I did.
And you are getting real ready for those.
Bayshore, right?
Yeah,
Coming up.
one month from today.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm about to enter sort of the painful part of training,
Okay.
where I really have to ramp up the mileage and ramp up the intensity.
Mm-hmm.
So last week was just a slight 88-mile week, and next week will likely be a 100-mile week. And me and some friends this Saturday, we're going to get together and battle it out on a 10-mile time trial where we try to run as fast as we can. So
Yeah, athletes like Craig and I know what this is like. I'm going to try to break a PR this year and keep up with Craig. We'll see. No,
Yeah,
I'm a terrible.
right.
No, I don't run. I do not run, but Craig is a very good runner.
What's
this
your-
is kind of like the, just doing ridiculous. Like last week was the Big Hero race
Sure.
at NMC.
Yeah.
And it's just a 5K,
Yeah.
but, the Ticker is a sponsor. So I got a free entry. And
Nice.
thought, I love doing that race because the students organize the whole thing.
Yeah, it's
they put
fun.
it all together. They each get a job. So, someone's manning the finish line. There are people out on the course directing traffic. There are people who are, working with the sponsors like us to, put together the prize packages and the food for the post race and kind of all that. So it's cool to see like these kids getting this experience.
Right.
And I wanted to do this race, but I'm also at a point where every Saturday needs to be, a 20-mile run.
Yeah.
So got together with my friend Jeff, who's also training for Bayshore, met him, ran a half marathon
Wow.
distance, came back, lined up at the start of the race, ran a 16:30 5K.
Oh, my gosh.
And then, went and ran 4 more miles to get to 20.
Okay.
Wow.
Like, that's really good.
That's too much. I'm
I
sorry,
mean,
but that's too much.
88-mile weeks, 100-mile weeks. I don't even like to drive that much in a week.
It seems normal to me when I'm in it. And then, I'll get maybe a month past this and I'll be like, how did I ever do that?
Yeah. Okay. I'll have you there. I will talk later because I used to do 5Ks and that was like my big deal. And I would do like 1 or 2 a year. And then it's been years. And I'm like, I just can't get into the mindset of like, do you want to do that again? Because for me, the hard part is
They're
just,
painful.
starting.
Yeah.
That's
the hard
That's
part.
the hardest part.
Yes. There you go.
It absolutely is.
Well, we are going to take, you are representing the Leelanau Ticker today, and
That's right.
We're going to Leelanau right now. Let's start off in Leland, and we spoke to a colleague from the Glen Arbor Sun who also covered this story when it first broke about Leland Township Planning Commission, and, there was a Youth for Christ group that wanted to really be right, I guess what we would call in the village downtown of Leland.
Correct.
And there were some concerns over the permit because it needed a special land use permit. So why don't you walk us through like kind of this whole story from start to finish about where we are now?
So I've been reporting on this since December. I'm not exactly sure when Jakob came in and gave you guys the status update on what was happening, but Basically, this came about late last year. There had been this group called the Leland Lighthouse, which is a branch of the National Youth for Christ organization. They had been sort of, I guess, more quietly gaining a following in Leelanau County and specifically in the Leland area. And, you know, the two young people who are leading this had been doing some work in the schools and having basically these Bible study and other similar events at their own private residence.
Okay.
And then one of these people, his uncle, had purchased this property at 110 North Lake Street in downtown Leland. It's a space that was actually previously occupied by Grand Traverse Distillery. Their kind of Leelanau outpost. I believe they are moving into a different location in Leland, but it kind of left this historically, traditionally a retail space vacant, and Leland Lighthouse wanted to use it as a clubhouse that was more centrally located, kind of more visible in the community, and maybe a little larger than their private residence to allow for, you know, more teens to come and be a part of this organization. So this all went to a public hearing, or was supposed to go to a public hearing in December. The turnout was so substantial that they had to basically postpone that meeting, move it to a larger location at the Northport Performing Arts Center. And they've since done a few meetings there, but they've kind of hit all these false starts where, you know, they've had to cancel meetings because of you know, the initial problem with the space that they had. And then again, you know, when there was a blizzard that kicked it down the road again. So finally we arrived at last week, the Leland Township Planning Commission was taking another look at this, basically with an intention to make a final decision on whether to approve or deny. And basically, you know, there's been conversations about all facets of this from, you know, people who believe that this organization is doing good in the community and should have freedom of religion to kind of do whatever they please, versus people who feel, you know, it's a form of indoctrination, and people who are worried about kids taking part without even parental knowledge or consent. So all of those things factored into the debate early on, but basically what it boiled down to at the township level was, does this fit the zoning?
Yeah, as is defined for a special land use permit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because this property is zoned, it's basically a commercial building.
Right.
And the question was, does a private club or a religious organization, because there was some debate about which would you classify this as? Would it be a private club or would it be a church? And do either of those uses abide by the zoning in this more commercial retail part of town? And ultimately what happened most recently is the township had received basically a legal rundown from this attorney they brought in, Tom Greer, looking at both sides, and he kind of walked through and prepared legal arguments for approving and for denying. And these were both provided to the Planning Commission. Actually, they were provided in March before the meeting that was delayed for the blizzard, but were finally reviewed last week. And ultimately, the Planning Commission sided kind of with his denial reasoning. You know, basically just saying, you know, there are a few statutes for zoning that this doesn't fit, and therefore we are denying the application.
So even though this kind of sparked broader community debate about religion and downtown space, and, you know, ultimately, though, it went back to the township and the Planning Commission and how they define allowable uses, club versus religious. I mean, so ultimately, though, it was a zoning decision.
Yeah, so far, I mean, there still is debate basically on the legal side about whether this zoning is even legal as far as it pertains to a religious organization. Because obviously, you know, the Constitution grants freedom of religion, and if the other side can make a compelling legal argument for, this zoning or this interpretation of zoning impinging upon that, then maybe this could go the other way. So there's question about basically right now, the applicants have the right to take this to the Zoning Board of Appeals and see if they can get this decision overturned. I have not heard anything to suggest that they won't be doing that.
Okay.
There's also some murmurs in the community about whether or not this will lead to a lawsuit. I would expect the zoning board to come first, but either way, I do think, we'll be seeing a little more on this story coming down the line. But this is kind of the first, the first milestone in months where there was actually a decision, because the debate just kind of went back and forth for a few months. And, there's been so much conversation. I think I've written about it probably 5 or 6 times. So it's one of those stories that keeps on giving, and I expect it will keep on giving.
You got to keep kicking it down the road,
as
right?
we get into summer and maybe fall, we'll see more.
So, I've had this conversation, you and I have had this conversation, Beth, with, it would be, if this was a commercial entity, because it's zoned commercial, it would have had no problem, but because it has the club/religious aspect of it. But I've asked this before, if they had a, say, religious bookstore and they also had meetings in the back for their youth group, would that have been approved? Because it would have been a commercial spot where anybody could come and buy religious literature or books, but they also have meetings in the back.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about this later in the show with one of my stories. There's this is a really key, important thing for people to understand, especially people who are just, commenting online, being like, say yes, say no, because they like a project or not.
Right.
There are use by right projects, and there are special use permit projects. So use by right is typically pretty constrains a planning commission. They typically have to approve it if it meets the site standards. Like, it's allowed. It's a use by right. It is a allowed use. So
it doesn't matter if you like it.
Craig may be more familiar with the zoning in Leland, but I assume since it's a commercial building, it would list in the zoning the different types of commercial uses that are allowed. Sure. Retail is probably a normal, that's typical correct, one. Yeah. So a retail bookstore would, usually be a use by right. Because it's something different, that's where you get into the special use permits. And special use permits, as we will talk about later in the show, do provide more flexibility for communities to have more say over the project, to say yes or no. They typically have a longer list of standards, and they go through more public hearings and more review than a use by right. So, in this case, a special use permit, you're really getting into, and Craig's story details it well, the attorney's, arguments both in favor of approval and denial. He really gets into defining what a club is and how that looks. So 2 different kinds of zoning, and they really do affect how decision making is made about what's allowed or not.
Well, I'm glad you're going to keep on this story, because I do think it's not going to go away.
It will continue to occupy my time. It sort of has. It definitely has become sort of the big Leelanau story. I think of 2026.
Yeah, I feel like we've had so many conversations on the show about zoning and about planning commissions. And I mean, this is going to sound very nerdy of me. I really get very excited about planning now, where I'm like, oh, this is not just you don't like this and you like it, kind of situation. There are underlying rules of what places can go and where in the community, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's property rights, obviously, that affect things like this, but also what you do with a property affects your neighbors. And so that's why we have zoning. And so I also get excited about zoning as a nerd, because people don't understand, and this is why it's helpful to explain with stories like this, to kind of explain it. You need to contextualize how zoning affects people's lives so they understand it better. And this is a great example. Zoning decides what can and can't go where. Yeah. And that can have huge effects on communities like this debate.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to keep it in Leelanau County right now. We're going to go down the road to Lake Leelanau. And this is another story that's really caught fire and caught the attention of a lot of folks. And
More controversy for you.
Yeah, a lot of controversy. Craig, you wrote about this on April 20th. This was at LeelanauTicker.com if anyone wants to find the story and follow along. Kind of walk us through this, because this has to do with the original Nittolo Seafood and Pizza in Lake Leelanau. The name Nittolo's, the original owner or chef, Eric Nittolo, and then the building owner. And kind of there's some conflicting stories about what is happening, but ultimately it kind of comes down to name use, right?
It does, yeah. So I guess to back up, I'll just say that, previously Nittolo's in Lake Leelanau, which is, the name comes from Eric Nittolo, who's a local chef.
He's well known.
He's very well known. Folks in Traverse City will know Nittolo's Little Italy down in the Warehouse District. That opened, was that 2020?
It was last summer.
Yeah,
right?
So yeah.
It was last year. But that was an expansion from this business out in Lake Leelanau, which is this, massive restaurant. And kind of, one of the fewer spaces in Lake Leelanau.
And also very beloved.
Very beloved.
Very beloved
Yes.
in Lake Leelanau.
But previous to Nittolo's Little Italy, Nittolo's in Lake Leelanau had always stayed open year-round since it opened its doors in 2021. So this story actually kind of starts late last fall, when the news kind of just got out there that Nittolo's would be closing
In
for
Lake
the off-season.
Leelanau. Okay.
At the time, I think the indication was that, it was just going to be closed for the season.
Mm-hmm.
Eric declined to comment at the time when I reached out, but closed for the season was what was kind of put forward on social media and on the website. So, I think everyone kind of just expected that would be back sometime in the spring. There was a little disappointment, obviously, from folks out in Lake Leelanau, kind of wondering, why this was happening, wondering whether it was related to, Eric maybe being a little busy in Traverse City at the Little Italy location. So there was already some chatter going on there, and then in February, this press release, very brief press release, just kind of started circulating on social media. Basically saying that this building was now available for sale or lease. Okay. So, raising questions about, is Nittolo's not coming back in that case? So that happened in February. I had reached out to Eric at the time, and he had indicated that, the fall closure was planned just as a seasonal thing, but then, quote, turned into more. And then he said, unfortunately, we are no longer operating at that location. So we reported this at the time. One of the last things he said to me is, that's all I am authorized to tell you. So, that kind of got my spidey senses going a little bit. But I didn't really know any more beyond that until Roger Colburn, who is the owner of that building, he reached out to me sometime last month and said basically, we are planning to open 2 new restaurant concepts in the Nittolo's building. And this is where things get a little interesting, because the first is going to be called, as far as I understand it, according to the press release, Leelanau Steakhouse Seafood and Pasta, which is going to specialize in, quote, cuisine, innovative cuisine covering multicultural fusion. But then the second concept that was included in that press release was Nittolo's Seafood and Pizza, which Roger reported would be opening under new management. The menu will remain similar to the old menu with exciting new additions, initially available for carryout and possible food trucks very soon. And then just noting that Eric Nittolo will not be involved. So this comes out, Roger posted on social media again. I reached out to Eric. Eric declined to comment. And then come to find out from doing a little more research, there is a lawsuit out there that Eric filed, basically alleging trademark infringement and unfair competition.
Because they're using his name.
Because they're using his name.
And Nittolo is his last name.
It is.
Okay.
Yes. And he, basically the only thing he told me is that confirming that he was not going to be involved, nor were any members of his family.
Right.
So no one from the Nittolo family with that name.
So no one bearing the Nittolo name is involved. Okay.
And so basically what the lawsuit is saying is that basically what Eric is claiming is that his last name in this situation is an unregistered trademark owned by him, and that Colburn in trying to use that name is basically, a case of unfair, misleading competition that trades upon Eric's brand name recognition and his reputation in northern Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And so Eric has filed this lawsuit basically trying to get Roger to stop using his name and also to, pay damages, any damages that come from profits from using the name.
Okay.
So that's all on that side. I did speak with Roger as well, and basically his side of the story is that he was the one who put forth the investment to start the restaurant. He always owned the restaurant. Eric was hired as a W-2 employee and has always been that status at the restaurant, and that they had this agreement where Eric was going to buy the name and the assets for $50,000, which was, as far as I understand it, Roger's initial investment. And Roger claims that last fall, Eric basically reneged on that offer and wanted to, quote, keep the assets for free. As far as I understand it, things kind of broke down from there. The two broke their business agreement, broke their partnership, and Eric went to Traverse City, where he's still operating his restaurant, and Roger was left with this building and trying to decide what to do with it. Roger also claims that Eric took certain assets and property from the restaurant and says that he's filed criminal complaints about it that are being, quote, investigated by the prosecutor in the county. So messy.
And these are all still allegations, and it seems pretty messy.
Right. I mean, I think the thing you have to acknowledge, just like from a common sense community perspective, and we see the comments on the Leelanau Ticker with Craig's reporting, and also just in the overheard, comment section of Facebook or whatever. But the story, I mean, from just a community standpoint, is very perplexing.
Right.
Because, the keeping of that name at the restaurant, maybe Roger believes there's enough reputation associated with it from its past.
Likely.
That would bring people in, which is maybe true. I think, the questions that we're seeing from people are like, well, one, wouldn't there necessarily maybe be a letdown or disappointment from diners who come in thinking that name means the chef means he's there, and then he's not? So are you sort of setting yourself up for potential disappointment as a business venture? And then also, if Roger's allegations against Eric are true, why would you want your business name to be associated with someone that you're accusing of criminal activity?
Right.
These are normal journalist questions, and I know Craig had a challenging task because both of them were very limited in the comments that they would make publicly.
Yeah, I mean, no one wants to talk about anything when it's ongoing litigation.
Right.
That's I don't know if it's rule number one, but it
can be a challenge.
A common
but
situation.
It's an odd situation. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people.
I want to say, so obviously, whether they were business partners or, as Roger was saying, he was a W-2 employee with, the idea that Eric was going to eventually buy him back out of that arrangement. It's a conversation of who has the right to use the Nittolo's name, and whether even legally Roger has a right to use Nittolo's name doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. And it feels very much...
Or could even potentially be the right business decision in the long run. Like, he may decide he may either have so many bad feelings about Eric Nittolo that he at some point does not want that name associated with him anymore, or he may continue to run into that issue with customers and decide to change it. I'd be really curious to see how it serves him long term, but it's an interesting choice.
That does seem to be what you just said, seems to be the common refrain in our comment section, is the question of okay, you... Based on what Roger is saying, he is the owner of this business.
Sure.
And so technically he probably does have that. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But technically, if you're the owner of this business and the business always bore this name, he probably does have legal freedom to continue operating the business in that way. It wouldn't be the first time someone owned a business that was named after someone else.
Right.
But the question is, would you do that
to what end?
in this situation, especially when there is now another Nittolo's in northern Michigan, and there's going to be kind of that automatic assumption that they're affiliated.
Yeah. And it does seem to me like even just keeping it seafood and pizza, like you're trying to replicate the business that Eric built with his name in Lake Leelanau. It reminds me of an episode of Nathan For You from years and years and years ago. I'm just going to put this out there, where there was a coffee shop that wanted to be Starbucks, but obviously couldn't be Starbucks, so changed the name to Dumb Starbucks. And obviously it didn't work, but it was like trying very hard to be just like Starbucks, but they just changed the name and it didn't work. And I think this is the kind of, because this, I remember in this episode that the individual really didn't like Starbucks, so wanted to go after it. But it was like, but you can't use the name. Or if you could, even if you call it dumb, you're actually
Starbucks
making your business worse. It just feels a little bit like that episode. And I'm sorry for anybody who hasn't seen Nathan For You.
One of the questions in the Facebook comment section was, why don't you just call it Colburn's
Yes.
Pizza?
Right. I mean, it's not like there's never going to be another seafood and pizza place in Lake Leelanau. But I also have questions about who, as maybe an executive chef, is going to walk into this and go, yeah, I want to get into this.
Well, he does say, he does say, that he already has a new award-winning chef.
Okay. Well, we'll see.
So I believe the plan is to open these 2 restaurants in May.
Yeah.
I've not seen a final confirmed date.
Yeah.
And when I spoke with Roger, he indicated that he wasn't ready to share a date yet, and he wanted to do that a little closer to when it would open. So, next month, I suppose, we'll answer some of these questions, but it definitely is another one to watch and continue watching, I think, especially, since there is this lawsuit component of it. So, I guess keep an eye on the
We will
Leelanau
keep
Ticker.
an eye, LeelanauTicker.com. We're going to come back with some Traverse City updates, including the future of the Carnegie building. But right now, friends, this is your final call for the Fresh Coast Film Festival in Traverse City. And I am telling you, I'm urging you that tickets are going fast. If you've been thinking about going and you're just like, maybe I will. No, don't wait. Head to tc.freshcoastfilm.com and grab your tickets today. This is the very first Fresh Coast Film Festival, Traverse City, here in Traverse City. And it's shaping up to be something really, really special. We have films and storytelling and community and that unmistakable Northern Michigan energy all coming together in one place. And here's the thing. This is more than just an event. It's honestly the start of something really, really special, something that has the potential to grow into a staple in our community for years to come. And don't you want to say that you were there at the very beginning? I mean, you do. So if you're someone who loves being a part of the action, we still have opportunities for volunteers as well. It's a great way to get involved and meet people and help bring this thing to life. So whether you grab a ticket or raise your hand to help, just don't miss it. Be a part of something really, really, really special. tc.freshcoastfilm.com, and I will see you there. All right, getting back to Traverse City now, Beth, we are going to start off with the car wash that was approved for Front Street. I mean, talk about people having opinions. You wrote the story this week, and planning commissioners, again with the zoning, they voted 8-1 to approve Tommy's Express Car Wash, which looks really awesome. But people had questions about the location.
Yeah, and people have mixed opinions about how awesome they think it looks.
Right. I mean, personally, I was like, spaceship, looks like a spaceship. I like it.
But yeah, that's something everyone has an opinion about. Yeah, I mean, briefly, we'll go through both of these updates quickly here at the end of the show. But so with this car wash on Front Street, this is Tommy's Express. It's a very fast growing car wash franchise. They have nearly 300 locations. They are planning to go into the property on East Front Street that has the former Burger King and the current Cup of Joe. And combine those parcels into one site that would have this car wash location. They've been before the Planning Commission in Traverse City a couple times this year. This is very similar, as I was saying earlier in the show, to the situation in Leland, which is that in this particular case, this is not a special land use permit. It is a use by right. So that property is zoned for things like car washes. And sometimes even that wouldn't even come to the Planning Commission for that reason. It could just be approved by staff. In this case, though, Traverse City has a requirement that if a business is going to generate more than 500 trip ends per day, it must go to the Planning Commission. So it triggers essentially, we know this is going to be a busy location. So we're going to have the board look at it. They delayed approval earlier this year. They requested a traffic study. Folks are probably familiar with that intersection very well of Garfield and Front. Very busy intersection. They were concerned about how a high amount of traffic in a car wash would affect the traffic pattern of that intersection. So the city paid for and hired its own consultant to do the traffic study. And I want to note that because sometimes people think that traffic studies will be biased towards an applicant if an applicant pays for it, which is a fair question to ask. But in this case, this was a city study. And they generally found it to be okay traffic-wise, except for two things that they recommended. One of which is to close the Garfield entrance into the car wash, and also to make the Front Street entrance right in, right out only. So you're not going to have anyone trying to do crazy left turns right in front of that intersection where there's a ton of traffic. So that those conditions were added to the approval. So that is how it will be set up. The planning commissioners, I will say, were not happy about approving this, and this is why I wanted to explain to people how zoning works. They all, almost to a T, I mean, they did approve it 8-1. Jackie Anderson was the only no vote. However, other commissioners said they were unhappy about the project. They straight out said they didn't like it. They had concerns. Now, one of the things I saw people ask about was the wastewater. It is very close to, Bryant Park and the beach there. They do have on-site recycling of the water. Anything that goes into the city sewer system is treated. So that is, addressed in the system there. But just generally, I think a lot of planning commissioners were hoping to see a different use on that site. They would have loved to see, some kind of mixed use development, housing, something maybe more retail engagement. Just having a heavy auto-centric use on that corner was not something a lot of them were excited about. Some of the neighbors were concerned about noise. But because it is a use by right, planning commissioners must approve these kinds of projects if they meet the standards. So people know they legally cannot say no unless they find a good reason. And basically the board said outright, we have exhausted our options. We have requested a traffic study. Every concern that we've raised, they've addressed. We have to approve it. So that was kind of where they were at. It is approved.
And now they're really looking at the zoning rules in that area. And Brian McGillivray, who's a planning commissioner, former city commissioner, said there when the new Shell station went out down the road on Munson Avenue near East Bay Plaza, he had opposed that project, and he had flagged at the time that he was concerned about gas stations and car washes proliferating in the city limits, and had raised this use by right issue. Like, we should change this to a special use permit, because then, as we talked about earlier, it's a more stringent review process. It gives the city more ability to say no. They hadn't changed it in time for this. They are now expediting the process to update the zoning rules so that future car washes and gas stations in the city will become a SLUP. So in the future, if there's another project anywhere in the city limits, they would have more say. It did not come in time for this project. So they had to approve it. Tommy's is coming.
So Tommy's is coming.
And it's now 3 miles away from the other massive car wash.
That's a big car wash down there, too.
So we'll see.
That just seems a little silly to build something that I'm assuming costs a lot of money.
We'll see how that goes. And we don't know the exact timeline. I know a lot of people were asking. Cup of Joe is there, very beloved. That will be closing at some point. We just don't know the timing of that
That's
yet.
Very sad. All right, another decision. Traverse City trying to decide who's going to get use of the historic Carnegie building. There's 2 main proposals. We've been following this very closely, and when I say we, I mean you. Tell me what is going on with that.
So the latest is, we did talk about the RFP on the show before. We talked about the Carnegie and the Bijou, 2 prominent city buildings that are going through this RFP process. It has been a bumpy process for both of the buildings. I think even the staff would acknowledge it at the city. The Bijou, I'll just let folks know quickly, has been on hold, but I think it's coming back on May 4th for consideration. Carnegie was discussed this week. The commissioners were set to look at and possibly vote on one of the proposals, one of which is Crooked Tree, which is in there now, has been there for a decade. One of which is Traverse Area District Library, which wants to open sort of a community history center there and take care of the city's Foster collection, which is in the basement. At the last kind of hour, the library and city staff, I think there had been an overwhelming amount of feedback sent to the city about both proposals, a lot of support from these organizations in the community. And the library and the city staff sort of met and proposed the idea of like, well, there's so much support for both. Can we put them both in the building? Is there a way to have co-occupancy in the building?
So the library proposed that.
Yes. And I think with having some discussion with some city commissioners and staff, Crooked Tree was not excited about this approach. They had thought they were, they had gone through this RFP. They thought a vote's coming. We're going to know. An important consideration for Crooked Tree is their lease is up in October. They have had to put all of their grant applications and programming on hold because they don't know what their future is past October. So most people will know it as an organization. Your planning is typically far ahead, especially if you're talking about things like art exhibits that are touring and things like that. So they've been frustrated that they keep having a lack of clarity, including for their staff and employees, about what the future is going to be for their organization. The co-location proposal was given to Crooked Tree pretty late in the process last Wednesday. The commission packet goes out Thursday. So when I talked to Crooked Tree, they said essentially, they met virtually with the city manager, and their view was they were sort of told this is what you should do.
Right.
And they said, if this was really collaborative, we would have had more input on what it looked like. We were sort of just presented with the idea that the proposal right now is that the library would completely take over most of the galleries 1 month a year to do a city history exhibit. And they would also have a year-round presence in the building in a smaller gallery. Crooked Tree feels like that would significantly cut into the programming they could offer. They have funding concerns about how the rent will be shared. And they also have security concerns that national touring exhibits typically have security requirements that having another year-round tenant in the building might jeopardize. So the discussion on Monday was just that, Crooked Tree did say again during public comment on Monday that they are not really interested in sharing.
Sure.
But commissioners are trying to see if there's any compromise to be reached. So they will do two things. They will vote on May 4th to extend Crooked Tree's lease. They are acknowledging that this process has been delayed and they need some clarity and additional time to be able to run their programming.
Okay.
So they are looking at a potential lease extension for Crooked Tree. And then by May 18th, the city manager is supposed to meet with both entities, see if there's any possible compromise on the table. And he will come back to the commission and say, yes, here's what we've come up with. Or no, these guys just don't want to work together. And then they'll probably decide between the two proposals. Yeah.
You ever share a room with your sister?
I have in my life. Yes, I have.
Your sister, the library?
Yes. And you can't just put up some duct tape and just be like, don't cross
how about
this
a room
line.
divider?
It does. It feels a little like that. And I know both organizations are really special and, there's a lot of wonderful people involved in both, but it probably did feel kind of like a slap in the face for Crooked Tree to just be like, wait, you guys met? And you just decided that maybe we could look at being together, but we weren't invited in that conversation.
And they're sitting tenant.
They're there.
Yeah.
So, I can definitely see both sides where, the library is going, oh, hey, can we work this out and all, work together on this? And then we, maybe we both don't get exactly what we want, but we both sort of win in that we can stay in the space or we can occupy the space. But it really, this whole story, when I was reading it, Beth, it really reminded me of when I got duct tape out with my sister and I was just like, you can't cross this line. It did not work.
Yeah, and I just will say as a final note that although yes, there are points probably to be made for both sides. Crooked Tree's frustration, its upcoming lease, its uncertainty about its future. It's feeling like it's been a growing organization is now requiring to shrink back. In some way to accommodate another organization that already has quite a few locations in town.
Yeah.
On the flip side, Michelle Howard, the librarian, a director, made the point that the Carnegie building is not a private asset. It's community owned. It's paid for for by taxpayers. It is a public asset. And what we do with most public assets is we go through RFPs to see what is the best proposal for the community.
And she's not wrong.
Even though that's frustrating for current tenants, and I've seen it come up with, Clinch Park vendors, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
People really get unhappy about investing money in a city property over a long period of time and then suddenly getting the boot. But that is the risk of, you not owning the building and being a tenant is that can be a possibility.
Very good point. Also, this process has been messy. Everybody will agree that it's been messy. And so that's not, this new addition is not made it less messy.
Yeah.
Let's just
especially
because
it's happening at the same time
Yes,
as
exactly.
the Bijou thing, which is also messy.
Yes.
Which we will find more about. Before we go, we like to talk about what we're excited about this week. And Beth, I know what you're excited about coming up this week. But tonight, the day this show is launched, which maybe you're listening on Friday, April 24th, you and I are going to Taste of Success.
Yeah, NMC.
NMC.
I'm very excited for
I'm
this
very
one.
excited too.
Cool.
The attire is festive. What would you say festive attire is?
Christmas outfits.
Christmas? I thought maybe banana suit. Like, I don't know. Like, festive.
That's festive in a different
Just
way.
like head to toe Uncle Sam outfit.
I'm very festive. Beth did tell me, she's like, I think it's not black tie, but nice.
Yeah.
And I was like, thank you. Because otherwise I'm just
like
there.
cocktail party is sort of my assumption. Yeah.
Festive is an interesting way of putting it.
So we were talking about Taste of Success, Fresh Coast Film Festival next week, launching on Thursday. That's a big deal. That'll be your whole life for a few days.
Yeah, I will be going on vacation, so thanks in advance to Craig and Art, my colleagues, for covering when I'm gone. It will not really be a vacation. I will be working the festival all week, but I'm excited for it. And I will just plug to the specific things at the festival. The opening night, which is at Elevate Climbing Gym on Thursday at 7 o'clock, is free. So if you just want to come get a feel for the festival, there'll be filmmakers there. We're going to have live baby sturgeon, because there's one of the shorts in the opening night is about sturgeon, dinosaur fish. So MSU scientists will be there with live baby sturgeon. We'll have a bar. It's free. So come to Elevate on Thursday at 7. We're also showing it at 6 local art house theaters. So if you live in an outlying region, you can go to your local theater and see it. We have all that info on the website. And I just want to plug that there are tickets available for most things. We've got cool partnerships with the IPR, like a live Points North podcast. We've got partnerships with Hearsay Storytelling for a storytelling event. Free outdoor tours and experiences. Some things are starting to sell out, like the Lister screening the Opera House, which people are like rabid about.
There's a second chance though at Right Brain.
We added a second screening at Right Brain. But yes, I'm very excited for the festival. That will be my life this week.
It will be your life. That's fantastic. Craig, you're running 100 miles next week.
Yeah,
so.
and I'm covering for Beth. So between those two things, that's
a different kind of marathon.
That's going to be my life. It's funny that these weeks overlap.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I want to say thank you to Beth and Craig for another great episode of Currently. You need to subscribe to the show on all the platforms. It's just super easy to do. CrystalFrost.com. Hit subscribe. It'll go everywhere for you. You can follow us on social media and subscribe to Currently with Crystal Frost wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch the full show on YouTube and Facebook. And Currently is a Compass local podcast. It's produced here in Traverse City by Pancake Boy Productions. Big thanks to Old Town Playhouse. Check out their upcoming 2026-2027 season at oldtownplayhouse.com. Additional gratitude to the Fresh Coast Film Festival, Traverse City. It's a new celebration of Great Lakes stories and culture filled with adventure. Get there. Thursday, April 30th through Sunday, May 3rd, presented by nonprofit host, all volunteer-led Old Mission Culture Company. And special thanks to our lead supporter, West Shore Bank. Start saving today at westshorebank.com. See you next week.